In the most recent podcast entitled The Looming Storm, I spoke a little bit about what is coming in the near future. And so with this video, I would like to expand upon that a little bit. We're all familiar with Noah's flood. It was a global deluge that wiped out an entire world. Well, the scriptures speak of another flood that is coming. A flood that will essentially accomplish the same thing. Jesus spoke about his coming, his presence, and he likened it to Noah's flood. Let me read a passage to you from the 24th chapter of Matthew. And that is, of course, where Jesus was speaking about the sign of his coming and all the features. But then he said, concerning that day and hour, nobody knows, neither the angels of the heavens nor the Son, but only the Father. I thought Jesus was equal to the Father. The Trinitarian said Jesus is God, and yet he doesn't know something the Father knows. Anyway, for just as the days of Noah were, so the presence of the Son of Man will be. For as they were in those days before the flood, eating and drinking, men marrying and women being given in marriage, until the day that Noah entered into the ark. And they took no note until the flood came and swept them all away. So the presence of the Son of Man will be. And then he gives another illustration. He says, then two men will be in the field. One will be taken along and the other abandoned. Two women will be grinding at the handmill. One will be taken along and the other abandoned. Keep on the watch, therefore, because you do not know on what day your Lord is coming. So Jesus was directing these words to his followers, not to the world in general, because he said, you do not know on what day your Lord is coming. So this coming, or this presence of Christ, will effect a separation. One will be taken along and the other abandoned. Well, the rapturists refer to this passage. This is one of their proof texts. The one taken along, they go to heaven, they levitate up, and poof, they're in the blink of an eye. And they leave behind the condemned to experience 7 years of tribulation. Well, before Jesus gave that illustration, he spoke of a faithful slave whom his master appointed over his domestics to give them food at the proper time. And Jesus said, you better be at it, because the master will come in an hour you do not think to be it. And if he finds that slave has not been true to his appointment, he will be beaten and put out of the house. So again, a separation. The faithful slave is taken, the unfaithful slave is abandoned. If you turn over to the 25th chapter, Jesus gives another illustration of 10 virgins waiting for the bridegroom to come. That's Jesus. 5 are wise and 5 are foolish. And they didn't take enough oil with them like the wise ones did. So when the call goes out, here is the bridegroom, go out to meet him. The foolish virgins didn't have enough oil. They went back to buy more oil, and consequently they were locked out of the wedding facility. In this case, 5 were taken along and 5 were abandoned. And then Jesus gave another illustration of a master who gave his slaves money to work with in his absence. He went abroad, and then when he came back, he settled accounts with his slaves. And the wicked slave did nothing with his master's money, didn't bring any interest. He buried it in the ground. He was abandoned, put out because of his negligence. So Jesus gave a whole series of illustrations to show a separation will occur among those who are called, anointed persons. That's what it's all about. And then Jesus gave another illustration to show another sort of separation that will take place regarding the sheep and the goats and the way they treat or neglect to treat Christ's brothers. And there are none of Christ's brothers on the earth today because they will appear after they are taken along and others abandoned. In other words, they are approved entry into the kingdom. The chosen are sealed, at which point they become Christ's brothers. And then, and only then, are the sheep and the goats judged the way they treat Christ's brothers. As Jesus said, you did it to the least of these, you did it to me. And what happens when those brothers are killed? That's bad news, isn't it? That means Jesus is killed again. And that's why the world will reach a point called Armageddon. But before that comes this symbolic flood. And what will it consist of? Well, as I said, there's quite a bit about this in prophecy. So let's consider the prophetic book of Isaiah. Isaiah actually has quite a bit to say about this metaphoric flood. We know that God used various nations before Christ, when Israel was his nation. He used various empires to punish his people for their unfaithfulness, for their idolatry. And one of those punishers was Assyria. And he likens Assyria, the literal city was on the banks of the Euphrates. He says, the king of Assyria and all of his glory will come up over all his stream beds and overflow all his banks and sweep through Judah. He will flood and pass through, reaching to the neck. His outspread wings will fill the breadth of your land, O Emmanuel. So Emmanuel means with us is God. So this arrogant king of Assyria, he'd conquered the 10-tribe kingdom, the northern kingdom of Israel. And he was preparing to lay siege to the prize, Jerusalem. And he'd already invaded Judah. So the floodwaters were getting higher and higher up to the neck, right? Well, what happened? Jehovah intervened, didn't he? And he slew the entire Assyrian army as they slept. And that was the end of their invasion. That's what it says in verse 10. This is Isaiah chapter 8, verse 10. It says, devise a plan, but it will be thwarted. Say what you like, but it will not succeed. For with us is God. For God is with us, Emmanuel. And with his strong hand on me, this is what Jehovah said to me, to warn me away from following the course of the people. Well, there's a lot here. I don't really take the time to read it, but of course it was talking about ancient Israel and the Assyrian invasion. But remember, the book of Isaiah means Jehovah is salvation, or the salvation of Jehovah. And that's what the name Jesus means. The book of Isaiah is all about Jesus. His coming as a man, yes, but more especially his coming as the Son of Man, the presence. So he goes on in verse 15, many of them will, let's go to 14. He will become as a sanctuary. That's to the ones taken along, not to the ones abandoned. He will become as a sanctuary, but as a stone to strike against and as a rock to stumble over to both houses of Israel, as a trap and a snare to the inhabitants of Jerusalem. Well, Jesus is the stone of stumbling. Because if people don't put faith in him, they will stumble. And we're talking about God's people. When Jesus came in the flesh, the Jews who were supposed to accept him as their Messiah, their king, they didn't accept him, and they stumbled over him. And Jerusalem was destroyed once again as a result. So it goes on to say, many of them will stumble and fall and be broken. Didn't Jesus say many will stumble when he returns during the conclusion? And then he says, wrap up the written confirmation, seal up the law among my disciples. I will keep in expectation of Jehovah, who is hiding his face from the house of Jacob, and I will hope in him. Look, I and the children whom Jehovah has given me are as signs and as miracles in Israel from Jehovah of armies, who resides in Zion. Now, in the second chapter of Hebrews, Paul quoted from this scripture, applying it to Jesus. And the young children whom Jehovah had given to him, to Jesus, were the anointed. Remember in prayer, Jesus said, I have not lost one of those whom you have given me, except the son of destruction. So this coming flood is when the Son of Man comes. Now, what is the source of this flood? It's obviously not a literal watery flood. And Jehovah told Noah after the flood, after they came out of the ark, he said, look, I do put my rainbow in the cloud, and this is the sign of my covenant. Never again shall I deal all living things a blow with a flood. So what is this source of this flood? And what does it mean that this flood, what does it mean? Is it a military invasion? Yes, absolutely. And we could say it will be a flood of tyranny. Well, what is the source? Well, I'm not going to turn there, but if you were to turn to the book of Revelation, the 12th chapter, it depicts these vivid images, a seven-headed dragon in heaven, and it's waiting for the woman to give birth to a male child who is to inherit the kingdom. But war erupts in heaven, and down the great dragon is hurled, the one called Devil and Satan, who is misleading the entire inhabited earth. He's hurled down to the earth and his angels with him. And then it says, be glad, you heavens, and you who reside in them. But woe for the earth and for the sea, because the devil has come down to you, having great anger, knowing he has a short period of time. So when the dragon comes down, he persecutes the woman and her seed, the offspring, the ones who are going to inherit the kingdom. And he issues a flood out of his mouth, symbolically, to engulf them. But it says the earth came to their rescue. Well, let's turn over to the 28th chapter of Isaiah. And it speaks again about this coming flood. And it lets us know who it's directed to. In Revelation, it was directed to those who have the work of bearing witness to Jesus and obeying the commands of God. In other words, true Christians, anointed Christians who are waiting for the kingdom. But here is Jehovah's judgment of his people, his organization. So hear the word of Jehovah, you boasters, you rulers of this people in Jerusalem. Now again, I have to remind you that Jerusalem is also a symbol for Christ's congregation, because Jesus was put to death outside the walls of Jerusalem. He told his disciples to stay there in Jerusalem until the Spirit came upon them. 120 were in the upper room when they were anointed. That was the beginning of Christianity. And they stayed in Jerusalem. That was like the unofficial headquarters of the apostles, really up until the Romans destroyed it. So in prophecy, when it talks about Jerusalem, it's talking about Christ's congregation. So for you men, these rulers in Jerusalem, you men say, we've made a covenant with death, and with the grave we've made an agreement. When the raging flash flood passes through, it will not reach us. We have made a lie our refuge, and we've hidden ourselves in falsehood. Well, again, that this applies to the second coming of Christ is evident in the very next verse. And Jehovah says, this is what Jehovah says, here I am laying as a foundation in Zion, a tested stone, the precious cornerstone of a sure foundation. No one exercising faith will panic. So Jesus is the stone. The 8th chapter says he's the stone of stumbling, but now here he is the tested stone. Jesus was tested when he was on the earth. Remember, Satan tested him at every convenient opportunity. And Jesus passed the test. The final test was, would he be willing to die? And he knew that was Jehovah's will, so he submitted to that gruesome and horrible execution. So he proved himself loyal to death. So Jehovah has placed him as this tested stone. We know he can be trusted. Jehovah trusts him absolutely. In fact, Jehovah has given him all power and authority. Jesus is going to sit on Jehovah's throne. That's how much he trusts him. Okay, so when this stone is installed, that's the second coming of Christ. And he says, I will make justice the measuring line and righteousness the leveling tool. Hail will sweep away the refuge of lies, and the waters will flood out the hiding place. Your covenant with death will be dissolved, and your agreement with the grave will not stand. When the raging flood passes through, you will be crushed by it. As often as it passes through, it will sweep you away, for it will pass through morning after morning, during the day and during the night. Only terror will make them understand what was heard. Well, the leaders of the watchtower, the ones who are the boasters, the leaders of this people in Jerusalem, they've made a covenant with death. They have this artfully contrived false story that Jesus came in 1914 and gave them his approval, and that now pure worship has been restored at last. They feel that they are the nucleus of a new world, and even their headquarters and other infrastructure will survive and become the nucleus of another headquarters in the new world. So they feel that they've made this covenant with death, that Jehovah will protect them through this. And they've hidden themselves in this falsehood that Christ has come, that the parousia has already begun, invisibly, of course, and on and on. You know, I've been pointing out recently that the Watchtower is on record that there cannot be another world war. They posted a little banner article on jw.org, Is World War Inevitable? And basically they said, no, it's not inevitable. In fact, it's impossible. Because they were saying that whatever little wars we see now, it's just a continuation of nation rising against nation and kingdoms against kingdoms that began 110 years ago. And so it's still ongoing. And apparently millions of Jehovah's Witnesses believe that. But people who are not under that deluding influence and who see what's happening in the world and who've not been brainwashed by the Anglo-American propaganda channels, they recognize that the world is in a serious, serious situation. NATO keeps provoking Russia through their proxy, making bolder and bolder attacks upon Russia, not just in Ukraine, but on the Russian homeland. And Russia is preparing to, what's the expression, take the gloves off, to really hit back, and not just with conventional weapons. We're right there on the edge of this. And we're waiting for Iran to attack Israel in revenge for the assassination of that Hamas leader in Tehran. And they haven't attacked yet. Well, why is that? Well, Vladimir Putin apparently told them to hang on a little while longer. And in the meanwhile, Russia has flown in massive cargo planes full of missiles and air defense systems, because Israel is a nuclear capable power as well. They have, I think, 40 nuclear warheads. They could do some serious damage to Iran. But with Russia's, SS-400 air defense system, Iran has a better chance of shooting down missiles in flight. So all these provocations and escalations are pushing the world closer and closer and closer to world war, a war that will inevitably involve nuclear weapons. And if you don't think that will cause a terror and a panic, boy, wait and see. But that's what Jehovah's talking about. Only terror will make them understand the thing heard. I've been writing letters to the Watchtower for 25 years, longer than I've even been online. And, to me, they're like the householder when one of Jehovah's Witnesses goes up and tries to engage them, and I'm not interested. No, I've got my own religion, right? Well, that's the leadership of the Watchtower. They're not interested, and they really do have their own, I won't call it a religion, but their own take on things. That's what he's talking about. We've made a lie our refuge. And it's interesting. Jehovah gives another illustration here, which I think is quite appropriate. It says, for the bed is too short to stretch out on, and the woven sheet is too narrow to wrap up in. Maybe you've had that experience on a little couch and a tiny little blanket, and when you lay down and you start to fall asleep, your body temperature naturally drops, and so you feel cold. That's why everybody sleeps with covers on. And so imagine that. And that's been the experience of the Watchtower. All the adjustments they've had to make to try to keep 1914 somewhat believable. They've had to redefine what a generation is, and a lot of other crazy stuff. And then Jehovah likens his work to something. Jehovah will rise up at Mount Perazim, and he will rouse himself as in the valley near Gibeon. That is in the days of Joshua, when Jehovah made the sun stand still in the sky on Joshua's order. Can you imagine that? Somebody ordered Jehovah to make the sun stand still, and he listened to them. So He says that he may do his deed, his strange deed, and that he may carry out his work, his unusual work. What is his strange deed and unusual work? Well, for a long time, Christ gave the command, of course, to all Christians to go, therefore, preach and teach, making disciples of people of all the nations. And Jesus said, I'll be with you all the days until the conclusion. And the Watchtower has sponsored an unprecedented Bible education work that has reached to the far corners of the world. And I believe Jesus has blessed that work and brought people into brotherhood and association. But Jehovah's strange deed and unusual work is to allow for this flood of tyranny and war to dissolve this organization, the organization that God has used to accomplish his work. That is strange, isn't it? Why would he do that? Well, to force people to demonstrate their faith. I mean, as it is, the Watchtower has this program. It's all laid out, and it's quite effective. But it makes people somewhat handicapped, dependent upon a mother to take them by the hand, and show them, underline the right question, and here's what you say when you go to the door, and on and on and on. But Jehovah only wants people with faith, real faith, that will survive the test. Jesus passed the test, and those who are going to inherit the kingdom, whether in heaven or on earth, will have to pass the test. And those that have faith, as the scripture I read, they will not panic. They will know that there's something else coming, something better, if they survive. I'm going to read one more passage. This is still in Isaiah chapter 54. And we know that when the Jerusalem was ultimately destroyed, God saved it from the Assyrian invasion, but then he brought Nebuchadnezzar in and had it destroyed. The Assyrian invasion pictures the attack that will come upon the restored congregation after Jesus comes, after those who are taken along and others are abandoned. Afterward is when the real kingdom comes into existence on earth. Spiritual paradise, for real. But when the Jews were taken captive from Jerusalem and sent to Babylon, and then Jehovah performed another rescue. It was similar to when he brought the Jews, or the Hebrews, out of Egypt. He caused Cyrus to topple Babylon and brought them back. And that restoration, Cyrus, who overthrew Babylon, is called Jehovah's Anointed One. That's interesting. So he pictures Jesus Christ, who will come to liberate God's people after they are subjugated by this flood of tyranny. Now, the 54th chapter, he says, "For Jehovah called you as if you were an abandoned wife and grief-stricken." Remember Revelation, this flood is coming toward the woman. "Like a wife married in youth and then rejected, says your God." Notice this, "For a brief moment I abandoned you, but with great mercy I will gather you back." And here's that word again. "In a flood of indignation I hid my face from you for a moment. But with everlasting loyal love I will have mercy on you, says your repurchaser, Jehovah." And then he cites the occasion of Noah's flood. He said, "This is like the days of Noah to me. Just as I have sworn that the waters of the flood will no more cover the earth, so I swear that I will no more become indignant toward you or rebuke you. O afflicted woman, storm-tossed, uncomforted, I am laying your stones with hard mortar, your foundation with sapphires. I will make your battlements of rubies, your gates of sparkling stones, and all your boundaries of precious stones. And all your sons will be taught by Jehovah, and the peace of your sons will be abundant. So it's talking about the actual establishment of the kingdom. Revelation likens the kingdom to this bejeweled city, doesn't it? Streets of gold and gates of pearl with the names of the apostles and so forth. So first comes the flood, though, and then comes the repurchaser for those who survived the flood because of their faith. Now, we might think that this flood is far off, but I feel that it is imminent. Even though Jesus said no one knows the day or the hour, we can certainly see that, as I say, world events are shaping up rapidly. Now, in the 11th chapter of Daniel, it uses that metaphor of a flood again. And in the 40th chapter, it tells us when the flood will occur. In the time of the end, that's the conclusion, the final part of the days, or the last days, if you prefer. In the time of the end, the king of the south will engage with him in a pushing, and against him the king of the north will storm with chariots and horsemen and many ships, and he will enter into the lands and sweep through like a flood. So there you have it. And he will also enter into the land of decoration, and many lands will be made to stumble. What is the land of the decoration? Well, it is Jehovah's land. It is his possession. And let me take you back to Isaiah again. This scripture just came to mind concerning the land of decoration. Now, this is the 28th chapter. I just read about the stone and those who've hidden themselves in falsehood. The flood is going to sweep out their hiding place. And notice who Jehovah is speaking to in opening words of the 28th chapter. Woe to the showy crown of the drunkards of Ephraim and the fading blossom of its glorious beauty, which is on the head of the fertile valley of those overcome with wine. The older version of the New World Translation calls it the land of decoration. And then Jehovah mentions the storm again. Look, Jehovah has someone strong and mighty, like a thundering hailstorm, a destructive windstorm, like a thunderstorm of powerful flood waters. He will forcefully hurl it down to the earth. The showy crowns of the drunkards of Ephraim will be trampled underfoot. What did Jesus say about the tribulation? When you see this disgusting thing, let those in Judea begin fleeing to the mountains. And then in the book of Luke, Jesus said, Jerusalem will be trampled upon by the nations until the appointed times of the nations are fulfilled. It is said here that the drunkards of Ephraim will be trampled and by this storm that Jehovah is going to unleash. And it's coming during the time of the end from the king of the north. Assyria came out of the north, didn't they? And so did Babylon. And So this coming king of the north is going to conquer the world, subjugate the king of the south, and subjugate Jehovah's people. The land of the decoration will be crushed, trampled. And so Jehovah's people will have no recourse except to plead with him, to beg him. That's what the book of Joel is about. And Jehovah says, go to the temple and beg for Jehovah's, supplicate for Jehovah. Perhaps he may reconsider the calamity. So I think we're already seeing the beginnings of this tyranny. And we look at, what's going on in the so-called free world. What a joke that is. They're persecuting truth tellers. They want to get rid of X and Telegraph because those platforms allow people to publish what they want, and they expose a lot of the criminal activity going on. And that's the one thing criminals don't like is exposure. Well, we're coming up on something that is going to rock the world. I don't know exactly how it's going to take place. Anything is possible. Another false flag set things off, perhaps. Maybe a nuclear bomb somewhere. I don't know. But we're right there on the edge, I believe. And so hopefully I'll speak to you again next Sunday. Thanks for watching.